The official designation for their homeworld was Sol 3, but in the mess halls and transit lounges across the charted galaxy, it was known by another name, Deathworld. The moniker was spoken with a mix of morbid fascination and instinctual fear. It was a Class 12 planet, a category so extreme that most xenobiologists considered the emergence of sentient life there a statistical impossibility. Everything about it was hostile. Its gravity was a crushing one standard, high enough to compact the skeletal systems of a dozen known species. Its atmosphere was a chaotic, high-pressure swirl of nitrogen and oxygen, the latter a notoriously corrosive and combustible element. And its biosphere, the less said about its biosphere, the better. It was a planet built on a simple, brutal principle. Everything was trying to kill and consume everything else. And from this planetary nightmare, a species had clawed its way to the stars. They called themselves humans. When Captain Zorgan of the freighter Stellar Wanderer informed us that we would be taking on a human crew member as part of the new Galactic Integration Initiative, the silence in the briefing room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a panic. I am Cathar. My people evolved on a placid, low-gravity world where the most dangerous predator was a slow-moving fungus. My body is a delicate lattice of calcium filaments and sensitive nerve clusters. A fall from my own height in standard G could fracture my limbs. The thought of sharing recycled air with a being whose ancestors had hunted megafauna with sharpened sticks was, to put it mildly, unnerving. Tella, our Lyran navigator, voiced what we were all thinking. Her feathers, usually a calm iridescent blue, had ruffled to a distressed gray. "Captain," she chirped, her voice trembling, "is that wise? The reports, the simulations, they say Deathworlders possess predatory traits. Forward-facing eyes for tracking prey, extreme physical endurance for pursuit, a psychological tolerance for violence. Captain Zorgan, a massive Zalosian whose rocky hide made him look like a sentient boulder, shifted his weight, causing the deck plates to groan. The reports also state that humanity has passed all sentience and civility metrics. The initiative is designed to foster cooperation. The human Alex has been assigned to engineering and general duties. My decision is final. First few cycles after Alex came aboard were an exercise in communal anxiety. He wasn't monstrous in appearance. In fact, he was deceptively unimposing. He stood a little taller than me, his body a collection of soft-looking tissues and a thin, fragile-looking epidermis. He had minimal body hair, save for a thatch on his head, and his face was disconcertingly mobile, capable of 1,000-minute expressions that were impossible to interpret. But the features Tella had mentioned were there. His eyes, two pools of blue set deep in their sockets, were fixed directly forward. When he looked at you, you felt seen, scrutinized, assessed. It was the gaze of a hunter, and it sent a primal shiver through my crystalline frame. His physical presence was a constant disruption to the ship's quiet harmony. On Cathar, we move with deliberate grace, conserving energy. The Glyptodan pilot, Grell, glides on his ventral sled, a model of efficiency. Tella flits. Captain Zorgan proceeds. Alex, however, walked. His footfalls were heavy, percussive thuds on the deck plating that announced his presence long before he arrived. He moved with a coiled, kinetic energy that seemed entirely out of place in the sterile corridors of the Stellar Wanderer. My station was in secondary maintenance, a web of conduits and processors adjacent to the main engine room, which meant I was his designated neighbor. For the first week, our interactions were minimal. A curt nod, a human gesture of acknowledgement he had taught us, which involved a strange, sharp dip of the head. I would watch him on the internal monitors during his off hours. He spent an alarming amount of time in the ship's multi-G gymnasium, a facility rarely used by anyone except the captain for his ponderous strength exercises. Alex would set the gravity generators to 1.5 G, sometimes even 2 G, and perform a series of brutal, repetitive movements. Lifting heavy metal blocks, running on a rapidly moving belt until the cooling vents in his skin pores, he called them, leaked water. It was self-inflicted torture, and he did it voluntarily. Daily, Grell, ever the pragmatist, was fascinated. "He's reinforcing his skeletal and muscular density," the pilot rumbled one meal cycle, watching Alex consume a portion of nutrient paste that would have sustained me for 3 days. "He's adapting his body to be even stronger than its baseline. Why? The ship's gravity is a uniform 0.8 standard for comfort. He is preparing," Tella whispered from across the table, barely touching her food gel. "Predators are always preparing for the hunt." Then there was the coffee. The ritual began every morning, precisely 30 minutes before his shift. A pungent, acrid odor would waft from the shared galley, a smell so alien it made my olfactory sensors retract. I found him there one cycle, standing before a small machine that was gurgling and steaming. He was grinding up small, dark, rock-like things he called beans. The machine forced heated water through the resulting powder, producing a steaming black liquid that smelled of scorched earth and bitter alkaloids. "What is that substance?" I asked, my curiosity finally overcoming my trepidation. Alex turned, a small smile crinkling the corners of his unnerving eyes. It's coffee, a Terran beverage. Its aroma is potent. It's an acquired taste," he said, pouring the black fluid into a ceramic mug. "It's a stimulant, helps wake me up, get the mind firing on all cylinders. A stimulant." The word echoed in my mind. We had stimulants, of course. Emergency medical doses for system shock or respiratory failure. They were carefully controlled, used only in dire circumstances. This creature forged in the crucible of a death world, was voluntarily ingesting a powerful psychoactive compound as part of a daily routine. I discreetly acquired a sample of the beans and ran a spectroscopic analysis. The results were alarming. The primary active ingredient was an alkaloid neurotoxin. In Cathar, it would cause cardiac arrest. In Illyrin, it would induce seizures. Even for a hardy Zelosian, it was classified as a moderate poison. Alex was drinking poison. For focus, I shared my findings with Grell and Tella. Tella nearly fainted. Grell processed the information with his typical stoicism. "So, his biology not only tolerates the poison, it metabolizes it for a cognitive benefit," he concluded. "His internal chemistry is as violent as his world's ecosystem." First real test came a month into our voyage. We were hauling a cargo of delicate crystalline resonance chambers to the Cygnus colonies. As we passed through a dense asteroid field, a shortcut the captain had approved to meet a deadline, our port-side maneuvering thruster took a hit from a fist-sized rock. The impact wasn't catastrophic, but it sent a shudder through the ship and triggered a cascade of alarms. The thruster housing was jammed, stuck in a half-fired position, putting a constant, dangerous torque on the ship's frame. The automated repair drones couldn't get a grip on the buckled metal. A manual repair was required. The problem was the access point, a cramped maintenance crawl space on the outer hull, blasted by solar radiation and requiring immense physical force to operate the emergency release levers. It was a two-being job, but no one could withstand the radiation for long enough. Captain Zorgan was too large for the crawl space. Grell's sled-based anatomy was useless in zero-G EVA. Tella and I were far too fragile. As the engineering team debated impossible solutions, Alex simply said, "I can do it." Our chief engineer, a crusty veteran named Foron, scoffed. "The main lever requires 500 kilonewtons of sustained force to reseat, and the secondary clamp needs to be held in place simultaneously. It's impossible for one person." "Can do it," Alex repeated, his voice calm and level. He wasn't boasting, he was stating a fact. Before he suited up, he did something that cemented his legend. He went to the galley and brewed the largest, blackest mug of coffee I had ever seen him make. He drank it in 3 long swallows, his eyes closed for a moment as if in meditation. Then he nodded once to himself and headed for the airlock. We watched on the monitor, a silent, huddled group on the bridge. We saw his suited form clamber into the crawl space. The space was so tight he could barely turn his shoulders. He positioned himself, bracing his feet against the superstructure. Then he gripped the main lever. The telemetry from his suit was displayed on a secondary screen. His heart rate, already high by our standards, climbed. His core temperature rose. The strain gauges on his suit's arms maxed out. For 3 solid minutes, there was only silence on the comms, broken by his sharp, controlled grunts of exertion. They were animal sounds, the sounds of pure physical struggle. The metal on the lever groaned in protest. I could feel the vibrations through the deck. "It's not moving," Tella chirped, her feathers flat with anxiety. "Wait," Grell rumbled, his multiple eyes fixed on the screen. Then, with a final, guttural roar that echoed through the ship's comm system, Alex put his entire body into it. The lever moved, a screech of tortured metal, and it slammed into place. But he wasn't done. With his free hand, he grabbed the secondary clamp and, with another surge of impossible strength, wrenched it back into its housing. He stayed there for a moment, his helmet pressed against the bulkhead, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Then his voice, strained but clear, came over the comm. "Thruster housing is secure. The Wanderer is flying straight again." He returned to the ship not as a feared outsider, but as a savior. He was exhausted, his muscles trembling from the effort, but he was unharmed. He had performed a feat that our combined technologies and physiologies could not. He had done it alone, and he had powered himself with poison. The crew looked at him differently after that. The fear was still there, lurking in the back of our minds, but it was now mingled with a profound and unsettling respect. The incident with the thruster was merely the prologue. The story of Alex, and through him, the story of humanity, was just beginning to unfold. Our perception of him as a predator was not wrong. We had simply failed to understand what it meant to have one on our side. The weeks that followed settled into a new kind of normal. Alex was no longer an object of fear, but of intense curiosity. His presence had become a source of stability rather than anxiety. Tella, who once flinched if he walked past too quickly, now brought him navigational charts to ask for his perspective, a word she used with an almost religious reverence. Grell engaged him in long, complex discussions about physics and engineering, fascinated by Alex's intuitive, often brute force, approach to problems that Grell would spend cycles simulating. "You humans don't seem to fear system failure," Grell observed one cycle as they recalibrated the cargo bay's gravity plates. "My species plans for every contingency. We build triple redundancies. Your history, Alex, seems to be one of fixing things after they have catastrophically broken." Alex laughed, a short, sharp bark that was still jarring to my audio sensors. "We have a saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I guess we just have a higher tolerance for broke. On Earth, things break all the time. Weather, machines, bones, you learn to patch things up and keep moving. We call it jury-rigging or making do. This philosophy was alien to us. Galactic civilization was built on precision, perfection, and prevention. The human approach of embracing imperfection, of innovating in the midst of chaos, was both terrifying and brilliant. We saw this brilliance firsthand during our layover on Xylos Prime, a sterile domed world that was a major hub for the Xylosian bureaucracy. We were tasked with offloading our crystal resonators and taking on a new cargo, live specimens of Lumina flora, a bioluminescent plant needed for pharmaceutical research. The problem was the loading facility. It was an ancient, low-G station, with gravity plating calibrated to a delicate 0.2 standard to protect the fragile flora. For the Cathar and Lyran crew members, it was a relief. For Grell, it was slightly inconvenient. For Captain Zorgan, it was comfortable. For Alex, it should have been a nightmare. A being adapted to 1G, who trained in 2G, should have been hopelessly clumsy in such a light environment. A single misplaced step could send him careening into a wall. He wasn't. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was utterly captivating. He seemed to have an innate, almost subconscious understanding of momentum and mass. While my crewmates and I had to use guide rails and magnetic boots, Alex simply walked. He used the balls of his feet, absorbing the lack of resistance, his body's core muscles constantly adjusting his balance. He was adapting in real time, his Deathworlder proprioception, his brain's sense of his body's position in space, operating on a level we couldn't comprehend. "It's like growing up on a ship in high seas," he explained to me as we guided a floating pallet of the glowing plants. "You learn to feel the pitch and roll in your gut. Your inner ear does most of the work." His inner ear. A simple organ that gave him an agility in shifting gravity fields that billions of credits of technology struggled to replicate. The second crisis struck while we were en route to the research colony. A sudden, unpredicted stellar flare erupted from a nearby dwarf star. The ship's radiation shielding absorbed most of it, but a wave of hard radiation washed over the cargo bay, shorting out the environmental controls for the Lumina flora. The temperature plummeted and the delicate plants began to die, their gentle light fading. The standard protocol was to reboot the system, a process that would take at least 2 hours. By then, the entire crop, worth more than the ship itself, would be lost. Panic set in. The captain was frantically communicating with the colony, Tella was running frantic diagnostics, and I was watching our profits wither on the vine. Alex was silent for a full minute, his blue eyes scanning the schematics on his datapad. Then he looked up. "The environmental system is shot, but the primary power conduits are fine. The lights in the cargo bay still work. We can repurpose them." "Repurpose them for what?" Foron, the chief engineer, demanded. "They're standard LED emitters. They produce light, not heat." "Everything that uses energy produces waste heat," Alex countered, already moving towards the access panel. "It's basic thermodynamics. The conversion is just inefficient. We're going to make it very inefficient." What followed was a masterclass in human jury-rigging. For the next hour, Alex, with me acting as his multi-limbed assistant, systematically bypassed the safety limiters and heat shunts on the cargo bay's lighting system. It was reckless, dangerous work that went against every regulation in the Galactic Engineering Codex. He was intentionally overloading the circuits, forcing them to shed massive amounts of thermal energy. "This is insane," I sub-vocalized, my manipulators trembling as I rerouted a power cable under his direction. You could start a fire, you could fuse the entire grid. Just keep the extinguishers handy, he said, his brow slick with sweat. He wasn't even wearing a protective suit. We're not aiming for elegant. We're aiming for warm. Before he threw the final switch, he paused. Zyler, he said, his voice quiet, could you do me a favor? Go brew me a cup, black. This time I didn't question it. I understood. It was part of the process. The ritual before the impossible. I ran to the galley, my light footfalls echoing in the tense silence of the ship. I prepared the toxic brew with practiced efficiency and brought it back to him. He drank it down, the steam fogging his face. He handed me the empty mug, gave me a grim nod, and slammed the master breaker into place. The cargo bay lights flickered, then blazed with an intensity that was painful to look at. The temperature gauge, which had been dipping into the critical zone, slowly began to climb. The dimming lumina flora seemed to respond, their ethereal glow stabilizing, then strengthening. Alex stood there monitoring the heat output, making minute adjustments, coaxing a dying system back to life with sheer, stubborn ingenuity. He had turned a lighting grid into a gigantic, low-grade heater. He saved the cargo. He hadn't used his strength but his mind. A mind forged in a world where survival often meant using a rock not just for a hammer, but also for a doorstop, a weapon, or a heat sink. It was after this incident that the philosophical discussions began in earnest. We were in the mess hall. Alex was asleep, undergoing what he called a power nap, a state of deep unconsciousness he could enter for a short period and emerge from fully alert, another terrifyingly efficient biological trait. He is not merely a survivor, Captain Zorgan stated, his deep voice resonating through the room. He is an engine of survival. His adaptations are not just physical, they are psychological, epistemological. He thinks differently because his species had to think differently. Capacity for making do is what I find most potent, Grell added, polishing one of his optical sensors. Galactic society has become reliant on optimal solutions. We have forgotten the art of the viable solution. Alex never looks for the perfect answer. He looks for the one that works right now. Remakes the world to suit his needs, Tella chirped, her feathers a calm, thoughtful lavender. When the lever was stuck, he became stronger than the metal. When the plants were freezing, he remade light into heat. He doesn't just exist within the rules of the universe, he actively quarrels with them. It was a profound insight. We, the children of placid worlds, had evolved to live in harmony with our environments. We adapted ourselves to the universe. Humans, it seemed, had evolved to adapt the universe to them. They were not just residents of their death world, they were its masters. The concept was awe-inspiring, and that was when I finally understood. The forward-facing eyes weren't just for hunting prey. They were for focusing on a problem, for locking onto a goal with singular, unyielding purpose. The endurance wasn't just for chasing down food, it was for outlasting a crisis, for working until the problem was solved, long after others would have succumbed to exhaustion. The strength wasn't just for killing, it was for imposing their will on a physically hostile reality. And the coffee wasn't just a drink, it was a tool. It was the deliberate ingestion of a mild poison to sharpen the mind and prime the body for the struggle. It was the symbol of their entire philosophy, harnessing the dangerous, the toxic, the volatile, and turning it into a source of power. We were prey species, all of us in our own way. We lived by avoiding threats. Humans were a predator species. They lived by confronting them. And in the cold, impartial vacuum of space, which was more dangerous than any terrestrial predator, their approach was proving to be demonstrably superior. We were beginning to realize that we hadn't just taken on a crew member. We had taken on an evolutionary advantage. And the galaxy was about to find out just how advantageous that could be. The final test, the one that would echo from the stellar wanderer to the halls of the Galactic Council, came without warning in the uncharted space between star systems. It was not a single failure, but a symphony of catastrophe. We were transitioning out of FTL when it happened. A quantum fluctuation, a 1 in a billion anomaly that the navigator's charts hadn't predicted. The ship didn't just drop into real space, it was hurled out, tumbling and screaming. The emergency systems engaged, but the sheer violence of the exit was too much. Alarms blared in a dozen different tones, a cacophony of disaster. Gravity failed first, plunging us into a disorienting zero-G environment. Then the lights flickered and died, replaced by the terrifying red glow of emergency alerts. A plasma conduit in the engine room ruptured, venting superheated gas into the aft corridors. The ship's internal temperature began to skyrocket. On the bridge, Tella fought to control our spin, her talons skittering over a console that was rapidly losing power. Main reactor containment is failing, Foron's voice yelled over the comm, laced with a terror I had never heard from him. The magnetic bottle is fluctuating. We have 10 minutes until it breaches. 10 minutes until the stellar wanderer and everyone aboard became a rapidly expanding cloud of incandescent atoms. Chaos reigned. I was clinging to a support strut, my delicate frame aching from the violent transition. Grell was trying to seal a pressure leak, his movements slow and clumsy in zero-G. Captain Zorgan was bellowing orders that were lost in the noise and confusion. Through it all, one presence was a point of absolute stillness. Alex. He had been in the mess hall when it hit. He propelled himself from the doorway, his movements in the zero-G environment fluid and controlled. His Deathworlder inner ear and core strength gave him an immediate, effortless mastery of the situation. While the rest of us floundered, he moved. Tella, keep broadcasting our distress signal on all channels wide beam. Grell, forget the leak, we need to vent the plasma. Foron, talk to me. What's the specific failure point on the reactor? His voice was sharp, authoritative, cutting through the panic like a blade. He wasn't a crewman anymore, he was a natural commander, born from a species that had to lead or die. The primary coolant injector is fried, and the emergency heat sinks are offline, Foron cried. There's no way to cool the core. Alex was already pulling up the schematics on a flickering emergency console. His eyes, those predatory eyes, scanned the complex diagrams with impossible speed. There is, he said, his voice dropping. It's ugly, but it's there. He pointed a finger at the screen. The cryogenic fuel lines for the impulse engines run parallel to the reactor core's secondary shielding. If we can punch a hole in the shielding and manually divert the cryofuel flow, we can flash freeze the outer casing. It might buy us enough time to restart the containment bottle. Foron was aghast. That's insane. The fuel is volatile, and you'd have to physically breach the reactor housing while it's in a critical state. The radiation would kill you in seconds. Not seconds, Alex said, his face illuminated by the red emergency light. Longer. My species has a high radiation tolerance, a side effect of evolving under a G-class star with a spotty ozone layer. He turned to me, his gaze intense. Xyler, I need you. Your manipulator limbs are precise. I'm going to cut the access panel. You need to be ready to sever the cryoline at my exact command. Can you do that? My mind reeled. He was proposing a plan so reckless, so suicidal, it defied every safety protocol ever written. But looking at his face, at the absolute certainty in his eyes, I felt my fear being replaced by a strange, new sensation, trust. He was the predator. This chaos was his natural environment. He was hunting the problem. I heard myself say, the words feeling foreign in my own mouth. Good, he said. Then he looked around the bridge, his gaze locking with Tella's. Tella, one last thing, my mug, galley. You know the stuff. Tella, her feathers trembling, didn't hesitate. She pushed off the console and flew down the corridor, a small, determined streak of blue in the red-lit gloom. Alex and I propelled ourselves towards the engine room. The heat was immense, a physical blow. The air shimmered. He used a plasma cutter from an emergency locker to slice through a bulkhead, creating a shortcut. It was another act of brutal, efficient vandalism that was also saving our lives. We arrived at the reactor chamber just as Tella returned, holding the steaming mug in her delicate talons. Alex took it without a word. The air was thick with radiation, making my systems ache, but he seemed unaffected. He drank the entire contents of the mug, the hot, black poison, in one go. He closed his eyes for a single second, and when he opened them, they were blazing with focus. Let's go to work, he said. He used the plasma cutter on the reactor housing, the beam hissing as it bit into the superheated metal. Sparks flew and the radiation alarms screamed, reaching a deafening pitch. He carved a small, precise opening, then recoiled, his suit smoking. Now, Xyler, the blue conduit. Cut it now. I reached in with my finest manipulator claws, the radiation prickling at my systems even through the ship's structure. I found the conduit, and with a surge of adrenaline I didn't know I possessed, I snipped it. A torrent of brilliant blue cryogenic liquid erupted from the severed line, instantly vaporizing into a thick cloud of freezing gas. Alex, with his bare hands protected only by thin work gloves, grabbed the severed, spewing line and physically wrestled it towards the hole he'd cut in the reactor housing. The cryofuel hit the superheated casing with a deafening roar, a sound of titanic forces colliding. A vast cloud of steam and ice crystals exploded outwards, obscuring everything. I saw Alex engulfed, a silhouette against the whiteout, his body straining as he held the hose-like conduit in place, directing the freezing spray. On the bridge, we watched the temperature gauge for the reactor core. It had been climbing vertically towards meltdown. Now it shuddered, it held, and then slowly, miraculously, it began to drop. It's working, Grell's voice boomed over the comm. Containment field is stabilizing. He did it. Alex held the line for what felt like an eternity. When the ship's main power finally flickered back on and the containment field re-established itself with a hum, he let go. The conduit whipped back and Alex simply collapsed, drifting bonelessly in the zero-G of the now-quiet engine room. We got him to the medbay. He was alive, but barely. He had severe radiation burns, frostbite on his hands, and his body was in a state of complete systemic shock. Our medical system struggled to even understand his biology, let alone treat it, but he was alive. His heart, a robust, powerful muscle, kept beating steadily. The stellar wanderer was crippled but intact. We were saved. Word of what happened spread faster than a distress signal. When we were eventually towed to a starbase, we were met not just by repair crews, but by officials from the Galactic Council. Captain Zorgan's report, which detailed every moment of the crisis and Alex's role in it, became the most widely read document in recent galactic history. The effect was transformative. The term Deathworlder didn't vanish, but its meaning shifted. It was no longer a slur. It became a title of respect. Shipping corporations, exploration fleets, and security firms began actively recruiting humans, offering astronomical signing bonuses. They weren't just hiring crew, they were hiring resilience. They were hiring adaptability. They were hiring the uncanny ability to stare into the abyss of total systems failure and see not a problem, but a puzzle to be solved with grit, ingenuity, and, if necessary, brute force. Alex recovered. His species, it turned out, was as resilient in healing as it was in everything else. He became a celebrity, but he remained unchanged, quiet, observant, and always ready with his mug of black coffee. I look at him now, across the mess hall of the newly repaired Stellar Wanderer. He's teaching Tella a human card game. Grell is watching, occasionally offering a comment on probability. We are not a collection of disparate species anymore. We are a crew. His crew, the galaxy, used to fear humanity for the darkness of their origin. Now they are sought after for the very same reason. We, the children of quiet, gentle worlds, built a civilization that sailed the peaceful currents of space. But space is not always peaceful. It has storms, it has monsters, and we have learned that in the heart of the storm it is a great comfort to have a predator on your side. The future of our galaxy will be built by many species, but I have no doubt that it will be saved, time and again, by the stubborn, brilliant, and terrifyingly capable children of the Death World. And I suspect it will all be fueled by a steady supply of hot, black poison.